Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we are looking at PS5 performance on the PlayStation 5 targeted SSD from Nextorage, the NEM-PA. This is the 1TB model that we're utilizing today. We do have a 2TB model that we're using in our PC review and benchmarking, but I wanted to start with the 1TB to get an acceptable minimum. As we all know that the larger the capacity of an SSD tends to that the performance is going to be heavier. So we're going to go for the 1TB to get a nice baseline performance test. I've not tested the 1TB yet. I should say the 2TB just gave straight away 6,500 megs. So it'll be interesting to see what this gives. For those that aren't aware, this is an SSD that comes from a company that is a subsidiary of Sony themselves. A lot of people, I'm sure you heard about this SSD online earlier in 2021 when there was lots of talk about this being probably the best kind of Sony linked SSD on the market, because it's the only SSD currently right now that's produced by a subsidiary of Sony. But again, how much you read into that is up to you. It's also worth highlighting that the company Phison, one of the biggest SSD controller manufacturers in the world, now owns I think like 49% of this company as well. So again, there's a lot living on the shoulders of this Japanese company here. And Nextorage, that came around in 2019, although this SSD is only available in Japan right now, according to the brand, it will be globally available later in 2022. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the game performs in today's games test. It's going to be Far Cry 6, the Matrix, that Unreal 5 tech demo. We're going to be returning to Demon Souls as well for another area of that, because it's such a demanding game. And finally, Final Fantasy VII, the PS5 version of that game. So first thing we want to do, of course, is make our way and format this SSD. So that's the first thing we're going to do. 3, 2, 1. As we format this, I have already done the hardware review for this SSD. Hopefully that's already live and YouTube's recommending it. And boom, 6,469 megabytes per second. That is a lovely number. I think it's just shy of 80 megs less than the 2TB. So currently this is one of the fastest 1TBs I've ever tested. Obviously this is only based on the PlayStation 5's own benchmark. But again, for a 1TB drive, 6,469, you know, straight off the bat, that's pretty darn good there. So, as mentioned, we're going to be testing 4 games today. We're going to be looking at Far Cry 6. We're going to be looking at the Matrix AWAKENS Unreal 5 tech demo. We're going to be looking at Demon Souls. And we're going to be looking at Final Fantasy Remake. So the first thing we want to do is move those games over. Let's transfer these games over to that SSD. And again, I've mentioned it in other videos, but I'm going to cover it again, a little thing about the background processes of the PS5. I'm going to move those games over, so that's 250 gig. We're going to be moving over there. So let's move those 4 games over now. So let's move those. 3, 2, 1. It's also worth highlighting that although this video is about how well these games load a lot of the time, we're going to be looking at certain things here. But unlike if we were doing a second-by-second bench test, we have to keep our feet a little bit on the ground. So for example, right now, when we're moving these games over, this is 250 gig moving to these SSDs. Now, although that should be a very fast process, the PlayStation definitely does some kind of compression, compacting, encryption, something in the middle. So right now when we're reading from the PlayStation's own internal SSD, which we've looked around online and we've largely ascertained the right performance somewhere in the 3,000 to 4,000 at the very top end for the internal PS5 SSD. When we're reading from it, it's going to be slightly different. Right now we are writing onto this Nextorage SSD, and that, you know, that compacting, compression, whatever in the middle creates a bottleneck. So as we've tested transferring this level, and we've tested moving 250, 350 gig of data previously, it always seems to take roughly the same amount of time, like for like, on different SSDs with the same amount of data. That's because of that technique in the middle. So measuring how long a game takes to move over is largely irrelevant, because it's going to take the same amount of time regardless if the SSD has, you know, 5,000 megabytes per second write, or in the case of this SSD, 6,000. Another thing to bear in mind, in almost all of our testing, we do not look at how long it takes the PlayStation to load the game to the title screen, or to load from the PlayStation's own XMB menu into the gameplay, because of publisher logos, because of all kind of internet connectivity, connecting with remote services if a game have an online component. All of these things make an enormous impact when we're accessing a game, and therefore it creates hidden bottlenecks and hidden delays where if we try to measure the load time loading a game from the PlayStation's main XMB menu into the gameplay, that it just becomes inaccurate to compare against other ones. So we only really ever look at the following. We look at how long it takes a game to load from the title screen to in-game, and then from within a game. If there are fast travel, if there is level loading, we look at those benchmarks and we compare them against the performance of the internal PS5 SSD. That's right, much like my other tests, what we do is on screen, for you guys at least, we have at the top left of the screen the internal PS5 SSD, and on the top right of the screen we have the SSD we test, in this case the Nextorage SSD, and we see how quickly this SSD loads the game, compared with if the exact same game in the same scenario is loading on the PS5's internal SSD. There you go. So again, we are looking for two things. We want the SSD to load as fast as the PS5 internal SSD as possible, but also we want it to load quicker where possible, because these are SSDs that have been released in some cases a year to a year and a half after the development of the internal PS5 SSD. As you see, these games have now moved over, so if we go into the storage manager there, we can go into the storage settings, and there are all 4 of our games moved over onto that SSD. On top of that, we can see while they've all been moved over, we can go into each of these, and Far Cry is going to be our first test game. We can scroll down, go into information, and now on the bottom right of the screen, there is the M2 SSD storage icon there. Another thing I'm sure someone's going to highlight in the comments, why am I not including Battlefield 2042 in this test? A couple of reasons. One, I am saving that for another big comparison coming soon. And the second reason is it is a massively online linked game. And when I test a lot of these games, I try to remove as much of the online component as I can, because that can introduce immeasurable differences between loading on the internal and the internal SSD and an expansion SSD. So I need to go through the game a little bit more, find a few offline tutorials perhaps, or offline bots modes where possible. And once I've got that routine set up, we will be including Battlefield 2042 in a next PS5 test. But that's why it's not included today. And the last thing I want to add is when we load into these games, we will play the game for a couple of minutes after we've loaded into them every single time. The reason we do that is a lot of games front end their loading. They load you into the game as quickly as possible with the big assets, and then very quickly introduce smaller assets like micro textures, distance textures, buildings in it, just stuff you're not going to see immediately. So when we load into any of these games, we will immediately move as fast as we can after the initial loading, just to catch out the PS5 in case it's trying to load in assets later, and we don't want the SSD differences between it and the PS5 SSD to have any kind of impact. But for now, let's load into our first game, which is Far Cry 6 there. You can probably hear in the back of the room the disc of the PS5 spinning up there. This is the only game we're testing today that arrives on an optical disc, but don't worry, all of the game data has been moved over. The PS5 only reads that disc in order to ascertain that we have a physical copy of this disc-based game. The fan is going to stop in a second. When it stops spinning the disc, it only utilizes it for authentication. As you can hear, it's no longer running in there in the background. So the first test we're going to do on Far Cry 6 is loading directly into the game. We should be on a checkpoint, and as soon as we go into the game, we're going to load in and immediately move as fast as we can through the game world, and we want to see how it compares to the internal PS5 SSD. So let's go in 3, 2, 1, go. And we're loading in now. And immediately, as soon as we hit the ground running, we're going to get ourselves a vehicle and move fast. And again, I can't see the internal PS5 SSD there. Slight drop there in the frame rate. But again, I think a lot of that is my capture happening there in the background. That wasn't an obvious drop in performance there. So again, we want to move through the game as fast as we can. think there's a dog there taking a crap, which is horrible. Again, we'll let the game do its auto driving segment while we look around the world. And we want to make sure that the game has loaded in everything that we want to see as well as it can. Sorry, I got a bit of a sore throat there from doing some other videos. Seemingly, it seems to be running quite well. Again, we're holding down on the accelerator as fast as we can. Let's move nice and fast, actually. But again, right now, I'm seeing no real differences there in the loading of the textures, the draw distance there. As we see textures swapping in and out, let's have a look at that. It's moved those textures in nice and well. I could have actually looked where I was going, but never mind. I've decided to knacker the vehicle quite substantially there. But again, let's call another vehicle in nice and quick. But again, even as we move in nice and sharp there, it seemingly does look absolutely fine. Seeing no problems really there to speak of. And I think what we're doing now is just moving nice and far away where possible from that original checkpoint. Because the next thing we're going to do is move into fast travel, just to make sure that the game is actually going to load that in nice and quick. But for now, it still seems to be running fine. I've seen no drop in frame rate, none of the asset problems there. All the textures while we look around the car still seem to be running quite well there. We can look around, all the close-up textures seem fine. So I think for now, what we can do is initiate a quick fast travel into another area of the map. So let's go off there and go off kilter. Push off there. And again, what we're going to do now is start loading into a quick fast travel there. So we're going to fast travel back onto where we were. So we're going to go in and we're going to fast travel in 3, 2, 1. So we load in. Again, we're going to move nice and fast as soon as we load into the world once again. No doubt you guys can see that there on screen. I'm all loading side by side. Load that car in. And again, all running nice and fast there. Still maintaining that lovely frame rate there. No drops. And again, I don't really want to do that. So for now, let's carry on. I think we'll just double check that the assets behind us are still running fine. But for now, everything's running smooth as I'd like to see it. Again, the way that car waved into existence there was pretty grim. Again, Far Cry, it's a good game, but my God, this new version is just, so Far Cry, so standard. But again, we're not here to review games, we're here to look at SSD performance. And I think for now, that's running pretty well for me there. So I think for now, let's make our way onto our next game, which is of course the Matrix Unreal Tech Engine. So again, I'm going to try to not introduce any cuts into this as possible. We're going to try and do this in one straight run to let you guys know this is all happening all in one try with no retries. And again, from this game, we're going to be loading twice in from the title screen, and we're going to be doing two things very quickly. We're going to be loading in from the title screen and then going into a driving segment, and then we're going to load in from the title screen into a flight segment, the second one being far more demanding for that internal PS5 SSD by quite a considerable margin. So again, we're going to cut in and we're going to load in 3, 2, 1, go. And again, this should be a very fast load. It loads into a sky area there. And then we make our way down into the world. So again, lots of assets are introduced very, very quickly here. And the idea is to immediately and as fast as possible jump into a vehicle and explore the world as fast as we can. Again, we've utilized this tech demo for a few different tests. We're definitely seeing like the world loading in as I'd like to see. Again, this Unreal Engine tech demo has been an absolute manna from heaven utility when it's come to bench testing a lot of these SSDs, the temperature tests, because currently it's kind of the most stressful thing you can do to the PS5 right now in terms of bench testing that hardware. Again, as awful as my driving can seem sometimes, in my defense, when I'm screen recording here, there is something like maybe half a second to a third second delay on my inputs, and this is already quite a slippy game. So the result is that sometimes the tapping that I'm doing here is actually happening a few seconds before you're thinking you're seeing it on screen. So it's super annoying there. But again, the game's seemingly running quite well there. I think right now the textures all running behind me. I know this utilizes a lot of destruction in the background assets, this game. But again, it's seemingly running quite well for me there. I think that's pretty good. There's no fast travel on this, but for now, I think we can say that's running pretty well. So next thing we want to do is make our way back onto the main title screen there, so we can conduct our next test. This is going to be doing exactly the same thing, but this time we're going to introduce the super fast flight, and you'll see why that's important in a moment. But let's go in 3, 2, 1. So again, it's going to load us in exactly the same way, but the first thing we do when we have full control is going to be very, very different there. And again, you are seeing both of these on screen at the same time. I can only see the Nextorage SSD there. But for now, what we're going to do is immediately when we've got control, we're going to start moving fast. We're not going to let the game have any time to let up and have difficulty loading in some of those graphical assets. Yes, the GPU, the CPU and the memory all play their part, but in the modern era of gaming, super fast SSD and an SSD that can introduce assets as fast as possible is going to be key, because we've got CPUs and GPUs that can handle these graphics substantially, but what we need is systems where the games themselves have the visual assets and graphics and cab files and everything brought in as fast as the GPU, CPU and memory can handle them. So again, it's very important for the future of gaming that these SSDs can do this job as quick as they can, but I'm seeing no problems there. I'll be flicking between, going high, going low, forcing the game to load in those textures as quick as we need them. Again, I know it seems like the drop in frame rate there. Again, originally my testing of this, what I was doing temp testing, and the test at the top right, there's a slight frame difference, I think, between the capture and the PS5. So do bear in mind that there is a difference in color scheme, but don't worry, that's nothing to do with the actual SSD. That's all to do with the capture of these side by side. But for now, I'm pleased with what I'm seeing here on screen. And I think for now we can make our way onto our third test game, which is of course Demon's Souls. Now, Demon's Souls is a game we have tested in the SSD series previously. We've tested Demon's Souls in some of our earliest SSD tests. The reason we brought it back is, one, it's too useful a tool for bench testing the PS5 performance, not just with SSDs but the system as a whole, to just use in one test. The game has such varied landscapes and varied digital assets drawn in that I think it's really useful for us to bring this in as quick as we can. So we're going to load into the game. Again, we are using offline mode, so we're going to count in and load in 3, 2, 1. So we're going to look at how quickly we've loaded into the Nexus, of course. We've gone in lovely and fast there. I'm sure it's compared to what you've seen on screen there. And what we want to do is go into the upper latria area. That is where we're loading from. So again, we've already looked at how quickly these games have loaded in. But we're going into the upper latria area and we're going to compare them together in 3, 2, 1. Lovely and fast. This is one of the largest areas in the game that also has a substantial area underneath you at all times. And even on the PS3 version, that a bit underneath you was always present. So again, we're just going to move through the game as quick as we can. Again, anyone that's ever played Demon's Souls, I hope I get a little bit of respect for the character build I'm running here. I'm running this on, I think, New Game Plus 2. So again, quite a lot going on. We've already opened up the down bit. But for now, I think we're just going to keep moving forward through this. We're going to ignore the gargoyles, particularly the one that's currently behind me, looking to really make things difficult for me there. But again, just going to keep moving. But for now, I think we're moving absolutely fine. And for now, I'd say that's absolutely fine for me there. I'm just going to get onto this upper raised area so we can overlook the general kind of scope of the level before we head back to the Nexus. And then from the Nexus, we're going to load into a brand new area there. So again, running fine. And for me, that's kind of what I'm looking for there. That's absolutely fine. So let's head back to the Nexus. And again, I'm not going to make you guys have to sit through that. We're going to head back to the Nexus. And then from there, we're going to load into another area. Okay, so we are back at the Nexus. So from here, the next thing we want to do is load into the last area of the second stone here, into the underground temple. So let's load in 3, 2, 1. And again, this is quite a substantial boss area. I don't really fancy my chances, if I'm honest, but we're going to give it a damn fine go. And this is an area where we've got lots of surrounding environment here, lots of lighting effects to deal with. But we're not going to let the game sit on that too much. We're just going to push forward immediately into another large scale area there with some quite intensive arena stuff there. Again, we're just going to run ourselves at this boss here. I've kept this boss empty. It's the last one left in the game for me here. We're just going to make our way in and just keep pushing forward. So we're going to let this guy do his thing. And again, running absolutely fine here. I'm not seeing any of the drop. I've just realised I don't have the correct ring on. So I don't have the thief's ring. This is going to be horrendous. But again, this is running fine for me here. And overall, I would say right now this test is running just as good as I'd like to see it. And overall, I think for now, we can make our way out of Demon Souls and into our last test game, which is of course Final Fantasy VII. Let's come out of that there. And Final Fantasy VII is just going to be a single test loading into the game. So let's load that up. And it's going to be the last test in today's series. Once again, this is the PS5 upgrade version. So what we're going to be doing from here is loading in from our continue screen. So let's load in 3, 2, 1. Oh no, we're going to have to do it from there. 3, 2, 1. Should be a lovely fast load as it is, and we're in. I'm just going to keep asking us questions. So again, we're just going to keep pushing forward as quick as we can. But for now, that's still running absolutely fine. So we can move forward as quick as we can. And we're not going to play too much of this because this is quite a closed linear area game. Still waiting for that lift to come down. That guy's dead. Where's my lift? Let's have a look. Again, that set piece didn't trigger there. But let's carry on for now. I'm quite pleased with what we're seeing thus far. Again, I can't, Nextorage have made it abundantly clear this SSD and the specs it's got. I would expect it to load all these games. Obviously, in the edit, you guys are going to see which one is loaded faster. I would have highlighted that on screen for you there. But overall, between these two SSDs right now, I think it's a no-brainer for me. This is a good SSD. It's doing its job. It's not the cheapest out there. But for now, it's loaded these 4 games in these different instances. I think we did 7 different instances as quick as we would have liked to have seen. But again, skipping that cutscene, we're going to have ourselves another quick combat section before we make our way back. Again. But for now, I think we can start thinking about making our way back into the PlayStation menu there. And let's try and do, just randomly, let's do a fire attack for the sheer hell of it. But for now, let's make our way back onto the PSN, move those games over, and just summarise a little bit of what we've seen here. Because, again, can't fault it. This is going to be the first test of 2 that I'm going to be running on this SSD in my hardware review. Let's move it over. Again, this will take longer because of the write speed of that PS5 SSD internally. But let's talk about what we've seen. I didn't feel any kind of change there in the performance of this SSD in the games and instances we loaded. The only time I felt there was a slight bump on the road was a drop in frame rate on Far Cry 6, but again, that drop in frame rate felt like it was more to do with my capture card than the SSD when we loaded into that first world there. Normally, if you see a drop in frame rate, you kind of see those frames drop down, but it was an instant drop another frame forward, which is normally a capture card kind of drop signal stream pass through there. But overall, for test 1 on this SSD, it couldn't have asked for a better result. Starting with a 6,400 megabytes per second benchmark there, and I will be revisiting that. I also want to see what the 2TB can spit out there. Is this going to be the first SSD we featured that can surpass 6,600? We will see. But in the description, you can see a link to the full review for this SSD, I hope, as well as lots of information and photos of this SSD and the PC benchmarks, of course, which I do recommend you check out. But otherwise, I still recommend this SSD. I do have my full judgment when we do our next test of other 4 games, all of which are highfalutin, heavy PS5 titles. And of course, there's some more games coming out this year. But thank you so much for watching. I hope this video you found helpful in your choice of making an SSD purchase for your PS5. I know the landscape is quite jumpy at the moment, with big games companies being purchased by, games developers being purchased by games companies, and therefore storing all of your games locally and not being overly reliant on the ability to buy these games online constantly and download them on a whim on a server that may remove these games along the line, it's a torrid place right now. So upgrading your storage, it's a good time to do so. If not now, then definitely before the end of 2022, because we are going to see a dynamic shift on the available games on most game stores very, very soon. Some old legacy games, certainly. But thank you so much for watching. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. Of course, click subscribe if you want to learn more as we cover this subject in more detail over time. And of course, if you don't know which SSD to go for, there are guides in the description. There are heat sinks recommended in the description. And there are links to the free advice section over at NAS Compares in the description. Genuinely free. We don't do anything with your email. Couldn't give a toss about your email, to be honest. There's donate buttons. Use them, ignore them. It's free impartial advice from two humans. It might take us an extra day or so to answer your query because we have got busy lives, but we try to answer everyone. I will see you on the next video.